Will bike prices ever go down? Maybe. That's a good question. With the slowing economy and having too much inventory, you would think they would go down. But will they? Will the manufacturers let the MSRP, which is the regular price of products coming from overseas or being made, going to the showroom floor, will those prices be affected by what we're in now after the COVID hangover and try to rebuild the cycling community and industry from here on forward? Let's ask those a couple questions. Well, first, let's start with,
welcome to I Know a Guy Bicycles, hanging out with a guy. This is As the Wheel Turns, So Do Days of Our Rides series. I will be covering topics of the industry as well as consumer views with my 30 years experience.
If you like these videos, please like and subscribe. What makes up a bike? Price in general, right? We got to know where this is coming from before we can know where it's going. It's one of those situations, right? Well, situation, the bike is made up of three different kind of major components in a sense. You got the frame and fork, which is designed by the manufacturer and spec'd by either Merida, Giant, or built in-house to their particular branding. And the second thing is componentry, shifting, brakes, derailleurs. Those have to be sourced from either SRAM, Shimano, or whatever brand to make sure they have those to build up those particular bikes. And lastly, there's wheels, and there's also tires and other tidbits that go together. So it takes a lot of a hot mix to make a bicycle. It's not just like one brand and it's all that one brand. No, it's about 5 or 6 different brands to make up every bicycle you see in a bike shop. So that lies a big challenge right there. The next thing is, well, part of building the bike is production. What's going to cost overseas or abroad or here to have those bikes put together once they are assembled and ready to be boxed in, sent to the actual warehouses. And then you have shipping. Oh, man, shipping from boat, land, air, whatever you may be, it's going to have a cost. As we know, shipping costs have gone up because gas prices have gone up. And then final for the cost of the bikes is bank loans. Well, the interest rates to keep on bringing those up, that's, unfortunately the United States leads this, brings this up, the feds. That kind of has a cascade effect globally. So looking at bank loans, like big companies, they have the big loan to have these bikes built, and there is a time they have to pay back those loans, and longer it takes for those bikes to be built and brought to the floor and sold is a window, and if it doesn't hit that window, they're starting to pay more in interest than they anticipate. Therefore, that forecasts a little bit to the actual bottom line of what costs are and what they project to have to make on those bikes. So since we go over the cost of the actual bike to be built, now what makes the actual MSRP when they actually get listed and go to the actual manufacturer like Specialized, Trek, Pond, where they're going to sell them at, and what they're going to be forced to the independent bike dealers to kind of stick with those MSRPs. They're not allowed to kind of discount those new models that just been released. Keep in mind, a lot of these new models hit in the late fall, so they have to get the next year's numbers through winter and the pre-seasons and the bikes into the sales room floors by springtime and ready to go. And in the time when they have a new product or even old, big companies, Trek, Specialized, and Pond, and Giant, they have to start marketing these. There's a huge cost of between race teams or influencers or advertisements, magazines, getting those bikes, especially it's new, got to get into some of those people that are going to actually test it or be paid to review it. And then you got those particular uplift and excitement to get people to buy those bikes. So that is the cost. So what's the other costs? Well, you have the wholesale cost, which is to get all the bike all the way up to the warehouse. And then you have a cost that goes from the warehouse from those manufacturers to the bike shops. It doesn't matter if it's a Trek-owned, Specialized-owned store or an independent bike dealer. There's like a cost to get to there. When it hits the front lines of those stores, well, let's start with the bike shop. Independent bike shop, mom and pop shop, like Parker Bikes, like where I came from. Those are going to be hitting the floor. Those dealers actually sign contracts and say, I'm going to anticipate it taking X amount of bikes, going to pay you a certain time later, another loan, and then try to get those bikes on the floor, take them in a couple different shipments before season hits. That kind of staggers their billing about 2-3 months later. And then also that, got to build them, got to, locally advertise that you have them, make sure your sales staff is trained, everybody's on board and ready to go by March and April when the season hits, or whenever the season hits for you and then that neck of the woods. There's a lot to it. In Canada, what I've heard, they actually have to take the whole enchilada up front early on top of their ski season, so they're like packed for no room, and they have to anticipate getting their whole shipment for the season in one lump sum. That could be in other places too. Here in America, we have warehouses we can kind of pull from, so when we sell through, we can get more as it comes in, but other countries have this big lift. So the independent bike dealers kind of feel a huge squeeze on all these costs to get the bike on the floor. So we'll talk about margins. Well, margins always, through the 90s when parents and I had Parker bikes, those margins were around 30 to 35%. So if you, let's say you bought a bike for $100, the cost on it, you're, hoping to make $130, $100 to $40 on that bike. That's $40, right? That $40 is split up in like 18 different ways, from the building, the employees, the insurance, the electricity, the heat, the AC, what have you, the running operations, right? So that's a huge lift. Well, that 30% is supposed to try to cover all that. Well, then also you do labor and all that too. So it is very, very tight. So when you look at those prices, the costs on the bike shop, independent bike dealers, it's pretty high. So when you're looking at those starting price points of $500 bikes, they probably paid $350 to $400, depending on the volume, of course. The more they buy, the deeper the discount, the different 3 or 4 tiers they can actually take and capitalize on. But that price, they kind of have to stick to it. But the price that they're stuck with is what their cost is from the manufacturer. They get that bike all the way overseas and built and ready to go with marketing company-wide. Let's talk about the corporate stores, which is kind of new in the last 5 years. Well, the corporate stores don't play by the same rules. And what I mean by that, they still have to have service, they still have to have somebody to build, they still have to have staff, building, lights, and all of those things, and leases and all that. But their margins are not wholesale level, corporate costs. So they make amount. And what my guess would be is EP from a company, you get another 15 to 20%. That knocks that bike down to about half. So if that $500 bike is probably costing them around $250, more like $200-ish. So they still make money off of employee purchases. I'm pretty sure they do. This is kind of speculation because I've never seen the wool behind or the curtain behind that. But knowing, coming from other sporting good industries, there's a deeper margin on a lot of those things. So on the cost of that, they're making a little bit more. So therefore, they have a little more of a padding at their corporate stores for staffing and locations and all that. They don't play for the same. I'd really like to see if they can actually run a business on 30% margin on bikes. Pardon the interruption, there is more. More, you say? Push the more button. Push it. Push it. I dare you to push it. Once you push that button, you get more details about the video you're watching, in addition to all the tools that I use in the shop, as well as suggestion for improving your ride. In addition to help me provide advocacy in the cycling community, also links to other social media accounts as well as my website to find the products I actually sell and other insights in the industry. Other videos linked below. Extend your cycling experience here on YouTube. And now back to your original programming. So can prices go down on bikes? The cost of materials from up front and building and all that and have them shipped over here, that's a lot of lift, right? You just heard me go through the whole spiel of it. Yeah, well, you think they would have to because the slowing economy, less bike sales, people are not buying. It's just like this is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And not in the States, it's all over the place. I know this because I see it. So what is this going to end up? Probably less quality bikes. We've already seen that already. You got like a $1,500 bike with bottom end componentry. That's going to be kind of the case where the bag of chips is going to see the same size bag, but the actually volume is going to be lower and lower and lower. You ever get that? You open that chips and you're like, it's half empty. So with all the costs of building bank loads and everything in a sense, well, unfortunately for the independent bike dealer, your local bike shop owned by mom and pop shops like Parker Bikes, they're going to hurt because they can't go any lower because it's kind of forced upon them by the bike brands, and they're kind of making this, their pricing. And I don't think a lot of it, I'm not talking about the $15,000-$20,000 bikes. I'm talking about your bread and butters, anything that's, $1,000 to $2,000. That's going to be the most volume anyway in most markets, mostly. And those are going to not have a much wiggle room. So the prices from now on those for the independent bike dealer are not going to go lower unless those manufacturers have special deals that will either be rebates or bring them lower and so forth. And you always wonder where they get these rebates, and it's a shell game for them. But they can help out the independent bike dealers, but are they? I don't know. Maybe the smaller companies, but the bigger ones like Trek, Specialized, Pond, and Giant, they're the big fish, and so they have some of their own stores. So they can get this. Here's the gold nugget. At the corporate stores, that 30% margin that they're not playing with, there's 30% they actually can bring down on those bikes. Will that hurt the independent bike dealers? Absolutely, because it doesn't mesh. And then all of a sudden you got this cascade effect, like, why am I going to carry Specialized? Why am I going to carry a Trek? Why am I going to carry a Giant? That's a big question. In addition to, you got direct sales like Canyon and Specialized. They're going direct to the consumer. Where follows suit is like Kona and Yeti and some other brands that are smaller going to have to do the same thing. So it's one of those things where can they bring their prices down? Absolutely. Will they? Probably not, but they could. Why? They have no brick and mortar store to deal with. They don't have rent, they don't have electricity and all that stuff. That's what the secret sauce of Canyon scare the pants off of Trek and Specialized, because they don't have that and have to invest into that. They don't have to have dealers. Boom. They don't have to have dealers. So who's going to work on your bikes? Who's going to repair those? I don't know. But this price of bikes, can they come down? Absolutely. Will they? I don't know. So what's the conclusion here? Can prices come down? Can, yeah. They all can. And at some point, the bank loans will go down in interest, materials might be expensive, shipping might be less, and all those things. But until then, they have very razor thin margins in the independent bike dealers. Who's going to get hurt out of all of this? Independent bike dealers. It is not a win-win situation for them whatsoever. So what your local bike shop is going to have to do is basically shrink that Specialized, Trek, and Canyon, or not Canyon either, because they're direct. Whatever, Cannondale and so forth. They're going to have to shrink those down, those particular bike lines, and bring on different niche bike lines to fill in. They're going to have to go back to those vendors and go, hey, we're not going to sign a contract for this X amount. We're going to have 50 to 70% of floor space dedicated for others because you forced our hand. In addition to, they have to come up with more running capital to do such things, because when you take loans with or borrow bikes basically from Trek and Specialized, and we're going to pay you back in whatever dating that they have set up, June, July, August, whatever it may be. A lot of those smaller companies don't have that kind of loaning power. So buying from those, like Salsa or Jameis or Kona, if you buy those bikes, they're going to want their bills to be paid within 60 to 90 days. That means you have to have more running capital. I don't think any bike shop that's a mom and pop shop or smaller shop has $200,000 just laying around just to invest more into their inventory, just to make the same, if not less, that they did already. Ooh, what a pinch. I mean, this is not good. So who started all this? Well, there's a lot of hearsay about that, of bringing the prices up, and they've been creeping up for the last 2 decades. But there's a lot of reasons behind it. Some are valid, I get it, and some are just, wow, why and why? And what's really kind of destroying or tearing apart the very fibers of actually the cycling community, bike shops, and the cycling industry is the direct to consumers, the brick and mortar stores from corporate directs. Is this huge shift. It's a new norm, boys and girls. It's not going to change. Prices are going to stay the same. Quality is definitely going to go down and continue to do so until, I don't know, some unicorn type magical wand and makes everything a little bit cheaper for somebody to produce a carbon bike for under $2,000. That's halfway decent. All those things. They're pushing new tech, they're doing this. They're going to be doing everything with the kitchen sink for the next 2 to 3 years to try to figure out what the new norm is. That's where we're at. And what's going to affect? Well, right now they're overbought and they have a whole bunch of sales going on because you got bills to pay from corporate stores to bike shops. And what's that going to mean? Less margin. And then they take a loss there, they got to make it up on the back end. That means future. They're going to say, okay, we took a loss this year, so we got to take adjustments and actually make a profit next year. So we're going to have to continually bring those prices up. It's kind of like a catch-22. But right now, if you see the bike, it's in your price range and it's something you've been looking at it, this is probably the time to buy. But yeah, unfortunately, the independent bike dealers, those price hikes is actually going to kill them. And unfortunately, they have no control over that. That was dictated from the manufacturers. So yeah, the blame on most of this and the failures of the smaller shops that come in the next year or two is really going to be based on the manufacturers. Yeah, some of these shops are going to get very creative and be able to figure out their next steps and be able to give the community a warm hug and so forth, either from downsizing their frames of the stores, their staff, to even to a garage size like me. It's going to happen. You're going to see a lot of that shifting. Or if they're a Trek and Specialized dealer, they're probably going to be trying to look to sell, try to move that to the corporate so they're no longer part of that game. Any case, unfortunately, in my perspective, bike prices are probably going to stay the same, at least the new ones. Right now, you got some sell prices, and some are pretty deep, and some are and because those sell prices probably really match what 2019 prices were for MSRP. So there's the shell game in a nutshell. From the garage, thank you for spending time with me. Until next time.